geldiniz hepiniz. Hem size hem konuklarımıza teşekkür ediyorum bizimle olduğunuz için. SETA Vakfı'nda bu toplantıda. Bizlerle birlikte Yemen'i
Today, in our meeting, we will be discussing and listening about Yemen, and today we have three very important guests, and they have different backgrounds in this respect, and since they have different backgrounds, they will show us different perspectives of Yemen, and they will be talking about Yemen from different perspectives. I briefly want to introduce our guests to you. I want to start from my left. We have Mr. Fazlı Çorman. He is the Yemen ambassador of Turkish Republic. And as you may all know, the Yemen embassy has stopped its activities for temporarily, and he is in Turkey right now, and we will have the opportunity to listen in from his perspective about Yemen. And next to him we have Mr. Samet Doğan from Anatolian News Agency. He is the war correspondent, and if you follow the Anatolian News Agency, you would know him. He is one of the just a few war correspondents in Turkey, and he is quite famous in Turkey. And in the Middle East, once we had a war, you see Qasım Süleymani first, and then Samet Doğan comes with very original photographs and video shots. And next to him, we have our researcher in SETA, from SETA, Mr. Abdullah Yeğen. And Abdullah Yeğen is mainly working about Iran and working on analysis about Iran, especially the wars about Iran. And he knows Iran very closely, and he lived there for a very long period of time. And I sincerely want to thank them all for participating in our meeting today. First of all, I also want to mention one thing. The Middle East is a very important agenda in Turkey. And considering the Arab Spring, Syria, Egypt and Libya, these three countries were on the agenda. However, except these three countries, the other developments in the Middle Eastern countries were not taken into the agenda. However, there are many regional conflicts in Yemen, and we didn't talk about Yemen enough, and therefore this is the reason why we gathered today here. We want to know Yemen in detail, and after this meeting maybe you will realize that Yemen is a kind of microcosmos of different conflicts in that region. I don't want to take much of your time, and I want to leave the floor to our guests. I want to give you a 15 minutes for the first round, and then we will proceed with the questions and answers from your side, and I believe that would be more interactive way. And now I want to leave the floor to you. I am not sure if everyone can hear me, but if please warn me if you cannot hear me. First of all, I want to thank SETA very much for giving me this opportunity, because during my duty in Yemen, I believed that the Yemen topic was not discussed in Turkey to an enough extent, and I was very upset about that. And by taking this opportunity, we will be able to pave the way for the future discussions and the future informations about Yemen. Yemen are generally used as a distance parameter in the political discussions. They are giving as an example, the Yemen is given as an example to describe the distances between the countries, but we don't want to go that back further. In the Ottoman times, there were many influence of Yemen on our culture. The geography is quite difficult in Yemen, and this difficult and hard geography influenced our popular culture and our culture in general. But when we look at Yemen in general and when we ask our people, what do you know about Yemen? We realize that we don't know much about it.
10-15 dakika içinde anlatmak gibi
Actually, I have only 15 minutes to explain and talk about Yemen, but let's start from somewhere, from modern times. Once the Arab awakening has been started in Yemen, the other countries was also influenced, like Tunisia or Egypt, or many of us know that, but it didn't active in Syria, but in Yemen it was active. And in 2011, the demonstrations started in 2011 in Yemen as well as in the other Arabic countries. And following the 2011 awakening, there were the demonstrations was tried to be suppressed by some violent activities. But since then, the President Ali Abdullah Saleh was harshly injured after a bombing attack at a mosque in Yemen. And after this bombing attack, the President Saleh had fled to Saudi Arabia, and there, after he was treated there, he returned to the country, and under the surveillance of United Nations, he was active again, and there was the Gulf Cooperation Council, was the international council there. And Yemen, unfortunately, is not a member of that council, even though Yemen is one of the biggest countries there. Depending on its economic situation, the Yemen is not a member of the Gulf Cooperation Council, and it is in short called GIC. However, despite that fact, Yemen has huge influence in that region, and in this respect, United Nations Security Council had approved an initiative for Yemen, and depending on that initiative, it says that Yemen is different from the other Arab Spring countries structurally, because Yemen had a peaceful transformation period, and there was an agreement with the Gulf Cooperation Council in 2011 in November, and there are three important things in that agreement. There was 5 stable members of the Security Council, and they were all agreed upon Yemen. And this is the most important thing that differentiates Yemen from the other Arab Spring countries. Normally, US, UK, and France are making an ally, and China are standing from another perspective. And if one of these member countries veto a decision, then we cannot do anything. And as Turkey, we were attending the Security Council of United Nations, and I closely know what has happened, and Russia has stopped the proceedings, and this is what we are seeing now in Syria at that level. In the United Nations Security Council, it caused an congestion block. However, it didn't happen for Yemen, and all the member countries, the US, UK, France, and China, they all agreed upon the Yemen's structurally peaceful country. The second key point is that there is no deeply influencing organization in Yemen. We have Arabic League. There are some other organizations, but they are not as actively as the Gulf Cooperation Council. Therefore, in the example of Yemen, let's save the Yemen and there was an organization to control the economic and political developments in Yemen. It is the Gulf Cooperation Council, and the Saudi Arabia is a very important country, and United Nations, Kuwait, Qatar, Oman, Bahrain, they are all included in this cooperation council. And once they agreed upon Yemen, then a new political transformation period has been started for Yemen. It was happened in 2011 in Riyadh. There was an agreement signed in 2011 in Riyadh, and this political transformation has been started, and President Saleh agreed to quit the duty, and following his resignations, and he will not be held responsible for any kind of political issue, and he was taken under guarantee by this agreement, and there was planned to have a 2 years of transformation period for Yemen, and we have already completed this 2 years transformation period, and there was new elections for the presidency, and there was a new structure, political structure. And we have H6 countries and the G10 countries in Yemen, and European Union was also participated to the agreement. And when we look at the content of this agreement, we can say that the articles of that international agreement is very binding, and it is on top of the Yemen constitution even, and it is a very top senior level international agreement. And after that international agreement, a new era has started in Yemen, and most important part is that there is a national dialogue conference in Yemen, and a new regime, a new structure was decided for Yemen, and the citizens of Yemen has decided it by using democratic tools. There was a referendum, and the new constitution was accepted. Abdurrabbu Mansur Hadi was the vice president, and he was a single man, and he was elected as a president after the referendum. And the former president, Ali Abdullah Saleh, has quit the presidency. However, it doesn't mean that he will not be included in the political life anymore. He is the chairman of his own party, and he is still active in political life. And this was the political transformation in Yemen. In the very beginning, it was very good for Yemen. There was very good improvements and developments, and it can be called as the Yemen Revolution. And after this awakening, there were many parties, partnerships participating to this revolution, and international conferences was working like the restructuring assemblies, and it was like that for 1.5 years. And after that period, there was a struggle for the governance. In Syria, there was the confidential witnessing procedures was still going on, and therefore there were some power struggles in Yemen. Then started a power struggle. After 2 years' time period has been completed, and there was another elections And first there was a constitutional referendum and then the elections for the presidency. But before we complete all of them, the things have been started hindered because the former politics wanted to be active once again in the new political structure. However, when we look at the revolutionary powers who executed the revolution there, they wanted to be on site as well. However, we realized that they didn't have enough power to stay in the political life, and there was a disintegration, disassociation within the community, within the society. And when we look at the general picture, when we look at the process, in the North Yemen, in Sada region, the Houthis was there, and the Houthis in northern Yemen has been losing their hopes, and they started to believe that it is not beneficial for them, and there was an uprising within the Houthis in the northern Yemen, and they had started to domain a different type of political discourse, and they adapted themselves to a different part, from a different perspective, and they and the Houthis had the domain of Amran and then the Sana very unexpectedly. And once the Houthis captured the Sana, it actually attracted the attention of the world in 2014, and then some few steps were taken, and finally the 6th of February 2015, there was an constitutional declaration explaining what's required for a coup d'etat. And from a very different perspective, this crisis was on the agenda of the world. There was some delays. However, the transformation period in Yemen was very peaceful, and it was shown as an example for the rest of the world. However, when we come to the end of this 2 years transformation period, we see that things are blocked and there is a recession right now. And what happened afterwards, some embassies had stopped their activities and they left Yemen, and here comes we are living today. Of course, as Turkey, we wanted to stay in Yemen for longer times. However, we need to take into consideration the conditions, the existing conditions, and the political obscurities. And our political authorities has decided to postpone the activities in Yemen. The Turkish embassy of Yemen is now in Ankara. We return to Ankara. However, we still follow up what is going on in Yemen, and our relations with Yemen is still going on, so that we can assume where Yemen is going and what can happen in the future. And finally, I also want to mention that in the incident of 6th of February, there was a new incident recently. President Hadi was in the house imprisonment, and it was understood that the President Hadi had fled from country and went to Aden, and because he was under house arrest, however, he fled from the country. And under these conditions, we understand that he will withdraw from his resignment, and he is now Aden, and he is trying to restructure his political life there. And it is a very hot and quite new incident happened in Yemen. Now in Sana'a we had a senior revolutionary council which is run by the Houthist group, and the normal governmental structure of Sana'a is taken under control by them. The ministries were taken under control by them. However, the majority of the ministers in Yemen has rejected to return to their posts after mass resignations. And there is an There is a new structure started to be established in Aden by the former president, and he tries to make it more legitimate and legal for the future. But there is an uncertainty, political uncertainty in Yemen as well. But in the future, we will see how this situation will improve. And as well as in the northern part and in the southern part, there is also certain disassociations. And we also, at this point, considering the disassociations within the community, we also need to take into consideration the identities, the cultural identities of the Houthis. And there are different tribes, and the Houthis, one of the tribes active in Yemen, and the majority of the population of Yemen are Sunni people. And we will see how the government will be structured in the future. By concluding my words, I also want to add a new point. While mentioning about Yemen and Houthis, I call them Houthi or Houthist, but in Turkey in general they call them Husi, and the reason is that the different letters and different pronunciations. However, I was living in Yemen, and they were using the T letter, not the S letter as Husi, but they are pronouncing it as the Houthis. Therefore, I want to explain it to you as well. However, in written language, there were some agreements previously, and some names or the Arabic words was written or with T letter but read with an S letter. This was also accepted. However, the personal names should be pronunciated as they call themselves. Therefore, I call them Houthis with a T letter. When I explain that, some Arabic language experts has rejected my argument. However, I still believe that I am pronouncing it correctly because I stayed in Yemen and they are using it like that. And therefore, I prefer calling them as Houthis, not the Husis. And this is my personal opinion, and this is all I can say. Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. The final point is quite explanatory, especially considering the Arabic Spring. There were new concepts in the Turkish media, and we had some difficulty how to call them. There were different names of tribes or different names of cities, and there were different type of pronunciations, like Ermenişehir they called, or there were very different concepts which were pronounced in a different words and different forms. Therefore, your quote about the pronunciation was very beneficial and fruitful for us. And what you have explained so far about Yemen gives us a very good background in order to understand what is going on, what has been going on in Yemen, and you actually summarized the general picture in 15 minutes. Thank you very much for your being sensitive about your time as well. Now I want to leave the floor to Mr. Samet, and he has just arrived to Turkey. It has become a week. A week ago he arrived to Turkey. And now I want to leave the floor to you. Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Approximately 8 months ago, my Yemen duty started. As our ambassador explained, what I will do in Yemen. There can be some conflicts, there can be some demonstrations, and there can be harsh conflicts between the different groups. And it was very difficult for me to accept that duty and go to Yemen. However, I can honestly say that considering my own experience, what I lived there, what I experienced there, I visited Libya, Baghdad, Damascus. However, Yemen was quite different for me. In the very beginning, I hesitated to go there, and honestly, I was waiting for the war to start. However, there is a thing between the communities of Yemen. There is an understanding between different tribes. There is a common sense between different tribes or different communities, even though they are rebellions, even though they are enemies or opposite parties. They can come together somehow and discuss their problems. One day they have conflict with each other, and the other day you can see different groups all together sitting at a cafe and having a tea. And in Libya or in any other country, I didn't experience such a picture actually. Therefore, Yemen is very special for me. There is a common sense within the people. And they are also chewing a type of green which is called gut, and the gut also influences their behaviors and attitudes. It makes them relax and more comfortable. However, in the other regions, the violence is continuing in a very harsh manner. However, in Yemen, if there is a conflict, people do not try to kill themselves. They just try to avoid killing people. And it was a quite different experience for me when I compared my experience in another country in that region. This is all actually I can say from the very beginning. Maybe I can give more detailed information in the Q&A session. Now let's hear from Abdullah Yeğen some detailed information, especially including Iran. When Iran intervened with the situation in Yemen, what has happened? Independently from Houthi or the Houthi pronunciation, what are the regional policy of the Iran, and what is the place of Yemen in the regional policy of Iran? However, the pronunciation matters actually. If it is Houthi, they can be supported. If they are Houthi, they cannot be supported. When it comes to Yemen, actually, I am very complex about that actually. What would happen in Yemen actually, it causes a confusion in my mind. because I tried to analyze every improvement there, every incident. For example, the former president resigned from the post. However, he now withdrawn his resignment again, and he tries to active in the political life once again in the Aden. And also there are different articles about Yemen that we read, and it also caused a confusion because there is not deep analysis about Yemen, and sometimes the information in the different articles can be confusing. However, I want to give a couple of information about the background of Yemen, about the conditions and circumstances in Yemen. When we first look at Yemen, we can see it is strategically important considering its geopolitical conditions. It is a neighbor to the Red Sea, and however, when we look at the sociology in Yemen and what is the influence of the sociology on that region, what is that? We do not have any deeper information, only I can say a one sentence. The Yemen is a tribal society and the weapons are commonly used in Yemen, and you shouldn't forget that fact. And it was actually a quote from a Yemenist. And if you don't have a tribe, or if you don't have a gun or an arm, you cannot be a real Yemenist. Therefore, that quote is quite important. So when it comes to the Houthi, who are them? Or Houthis, who are them? I will try to explain them from the perspective of Iran, and also I will mention about their sects, and we also need to mention about the Yazidis when it comes to Houthis. And actually the name of Houthi is quite new. The Abdülmelik Houthi had a brother, and after that family, the tribe is named after that family as Houthi, and they are a group from the Zaydis, and Zaydis is also a very important tribe in Yemen. And there's another key factor about that. The father Houthi was very active in 1962 in the revolutions, and he was representing the imam of that time. And 20 years ago, there was an important discussion in the ulema, Zaydi ulema, and how to have a governance. And the former caliphs was very respected persons, and there were 12 imams at that time, and these 12 imam and the 12th imam were really important at that time, and they were representing the whole tribe, and they were the son of Fatima with the arm, and they can, if someone who is a son of Fatima with a gun can be a imam at that time. And there were some discussions, and some ulemas has discussed that, had argued that
gerekliydi kondu ama bugün bu geçerli değil.
At that time, in order to be Hadis, the governors has to be from the Hashimi dynasty. However, right now it is not compulsory, but at that time it was compulsory. And secondly, Hüseyin Husi had lost his life in an attack in 2004. However, Hüseyin Husi's dialogues are still taken as an example and referred. And in general, he has harsh criticisms about the Zaydi's first caliph's legitimacy. Therefore, Hüseyin Husi
bir şekilde güçlendiğini, hadi başladığını da demeyeyim ama güçlendiğini görüyoruz. The
Hüseyin Husi's policies had contributed to the strengthening the Husi's structure and Husi's status there. And one of my friends from the Yemen has said that it is almost impossible to find some written information or Zaydi books right now. There is not that much information about them. And once this is the situation, it shows us the coordination with Iran. What is the relation with Iran? Abdul Malik Husi and Babal Malik Husi were in Iran. They lived in Iran for some time. And they also received some education and training there. And they returned to be a Jafari. And there is a tendency among the Husis to become a Jafari. And it is also caused by the governance as well. They believe that Zaydi Imams are compulsory for the government. However, once the revolution was completed, there had some problems with the governance in the region. And recently there was a tendency for the pluralistic state. However, in general, when you look at their approach to the situation, they didn't want to have a republican or the democratic state, but they want to have an imam state instead. So where does Iran stand here? There are two perspectives. One of them is that Iran can control Husis for all means and they can use them as a tool. And the other argument is that Iran is not intervening with any kind of situation with Husis, and this is totally the domestic issue of Yemen. I believe that both arguments can be true for Yemen, and the justifications and the reasonings are quite sound for that. And for the dictatorship of Salih, which lasted for 30 years, there were harsh struggles. And when you look at the request of that time, you can see that within that concept, they are very important tribe, and therefore they had a huge influence. And when we consider from that perspective, we can say that it is a domestic issue. However, if it is a domestic issue, why we're talking about Iran? However, we see some Iranian intervention. This is for sure. For example, they supported that region with some armed guns, and Iran don't want to leave the local government on its own. And I totally forget about the time once I started to talk, and I will try to summarize my speech. First of all, considering the foreign policy of Iran, I can say that the foreign policy of Iran for a very long time was turning around the Wahdat perspective. However, these concepts are understood from the perspective of ideology or sensitive issues. However, they are a political instrument. Therefore, one of the most important theories of Iranian foreign policy is about the real continent. However, it was based on Wahdat, and only Tehran is quite important here, and Tehran is the key point. It is the key continent here, and it is based on Wahdat's policies. However, these are not sensitive statements. This is the request of the citizens in that region. And during the Iran-Iraq war, for example, people tend to have different perspectives. But however, after that war, they started to focus on the Shia sect. However, again, I want to emphasize that the Iran's policy of disseminating the Shia is not a sensitive issue. It is a political issue. The disseminating of the Shia sect by Iran is a political issue, and when we look at this situation from that perspective, we can again say that it is based on the Wahdat's politics. And all of the Shiites should govern the whole country. If it is not possible, they can cooperate in the governance as well, and this was the new policy, and it was also the situation in Yemen. On the other hand, there were some improvements in Iraq, and it was quite related with improvements in Iraq as well, not only Iran. In Syria, we had ISIL, and Iran thinks that it is supported by Arabic countries, and then he decided to impose a new threat for Arabic countries in return. Secondly, what kind of a dialogue did I have with the Western countries, with the USA, for example? And the nuclear energy issue is one of the most important issues with the USA, and that point is quite important. In Yemen, there is Ansarullah, and in Iran we had ISIL, and these are the enemies of the Western countries, and Iran can rule that war against them, and they can get some military benefits as well. And they will try to make that nuclear issue more clear for the USA and Iran. Will that work? Actually, we will see. However, there is a real complexity in Iran. First of all, the Houthis are still considered as Zaydis, and Houthis never has the capacity and power to rule Yemen on their own. Therefore, the Houthis need to make a cooperation, make a coalition. And if they cooperate with Iran, they need to revise their policies as well. And this will be the same for the Syria as well and for the other countries as well. And one last sentence will be about the Arabia. because Arabia is the backyard of Yemen. Yemen is considered as the backyard of Arabia. Therefore, it has an influence. First of all, there's an Iranian factor there. In Yemen, we have Islah Party. Ikhwan-ı Mazlum has the party. And in the Saudi Arabia was not happy with that situation. And in the short term, Houthis can change their parties that they supported, because the Ikhwan party's political and the societal basement and their political life is very difficult for them. And within that concept, the Saudi Arabia will prefer Houthis than Ikhwan because it is much more easier for them. And the Salih is very effective on the army, and there is not real relations with the Saudi Arabia, still not close relations. There is not close relations. And they are the United Arab Kingdom, and they are and Saudi Arabia tried to trigger Egypt against Yemen. However, Ikhwan-ı is quite important for Yemen in this respect. Thank you very much. Actually, we had an introduction session and there are many things to be answered actually. First of all, the Saudi Arabia factor is quite important. Ali Aqsadi, where he stands in this process. And you also mentioned about the Yemen and Obama in the speech of State Union, he said that there is a Yemeni model for Syria, and the point where we stand now shows us that Yemeni model is not a popular model that we need to chase after. There can be another model. It is not that beneficial for us. And the Yemeni region has a tendency to war, and there is a relation with the USA as well. And this was actually an introduction part. And now I want to leave the floor to our participants. Let's have a Q&A session. And I have a request. Please keep your questions short. And please also introduce yourself, who you are, on which institution you are representing. And please give a short introduction about yourself, and please use the microphone.
Yok, oturabilirsiniz.
Evet, öncelikle tüm konuşmacı arkadaşlar.
First of all, I really want to thank to all of our keynote speakers, especially to our Mr. Ambassador, and I am working as the local coordinator, but I am very lucky. I resigned myself and left Yemen before I had to leave Yemen. Approximately 20 days ago, I left Yemen. After that political and societal incidents, I had to leave Yemen, and my story with Yemen started in 2007, and I had a story of 8 years almost. In 2007, I was started to study in Sana University as an academician, and I also established a new department there. And before the Arabic Spring, 3 years before the Arabic Spring, I had the chance to know Yemen better, and then I also had the chance to follow up what is going on in Yemen from the newspapers. And in 2002,
koordinasyon ofisini kurmak
I was appointed to establish the Yemen Coordination Office with the Presidency, with the Prime Ministry and the Cooperation Institution of Turkey. And in this respect, there were 3 phases, and I had the chance to witness these 3 phases in Yemen. When we went to Yemen in 2007, the main agenda of Yemen was about the Houthi wars. And it was the hot topic in Yemen, and they were also discussing about the southern movement all over again. However, it was not that harsh discussions at that time. So what attracted me to Yemen actually, the most important factor is that in the history of Islam, when you analyze the sects in Islamic they can divide it into 2. There are 2 different types of sects in Islamic history. And while making these classifications, we need to make them away from the policy. Could you please ask your questions? I am sorry for that. I have many things on my mind, but okay, I will ask my question. Considering all these current developments, considering
Yemen'den ayrılmak zorunda kalmasından dolayı şöyle bir kavram kullanabilir miyiz?
Can we use a new concept?
Büyükelçilikler veya kovulmuş uluslararası temsilcilikler diye bir ifade kullanabilir miyiz?
Can we use a concept like the turn down embassies? Because the international bodies had to leave Yemen, even though we had the representatives of the United Nations, America, the Western countries, including Turkey, we had to flee from Yemen. And will there be any solution for that? And can we call this situation as the turn down embassies? Let's add one more question and then we will answer them. My name is Mahmut Temeli, Jansi Association I am the coordinator of foreign relations. I have a couple of questions. Will that be possible? Please be quick. What are the factors that make Houthis powerful? And we know that there is a support from Saudi Arabia to the Houthis. They have a clear support to them. And Saleh is also supporting the Houthis. And in previous week, actually, they asked the institutions, the Houthis, to leave the institutions. And what was could you please repeat the last question? The United Nations or NATO, unconditionally, they ask Houthis to leave the capital. What is the conclusion of that? And you also mentioned that the Yemen will be divided into 3. What is that good for whom? And there's one last question. Ankara University Faculty of Law. My question is to Mr. Samet Doğan. He shared a photo in the Arabian Peninsula, and including the Al-Qaeda, and on the photo we see the brothers fighting against each other. And after I saw the picture, a question came to my mind, especially in the recent times the Houthis had regained power. And there's allegations that they accepted the leadership of Al-Qaeda and they are having a sympathy for the Al-Qaeda. I am asking is that true or not? If there is, we can receive one more question. I'm a master's degree student from Sabancı University. My question is about the Qatar. Qatar had a very peaceful role for a long time. However, since 2011, they started to support Kuwait. And what is the influence right now, considering Qatar on the other hand, USA is also had operations in Yemen. And what is the latest situation? If there is another question, let's hear one more question. My name is Neslihan. My question is to Mr. Abdullah. Do you think that Saudi Arabia can make cooperation with Houthis? However, a couple of weeks ago, they had an interview with the Saudi Arabia. However, when we look at the general picture,
tekrar değerlendirebilir misiniz? Islah'la görüşmelerini de göz önüne.
Considering their interviews with the Islah, will new cooperations will that be possible?
Çok teşekkürler. Değerli Profesör Doktor
Distinguished Professor Dr. Faruk Bozgöz is one of my friends, is one of the most important colleague of mine in Yemen, and we work together with him in Yemen. And thanks to his contribution, you can organize another panel about Yemen, and he has well-structured and very deep experience. And as an academician, he can share all his information very efficiently with you. What Faruk Bey has mentioned is that he mentioned that turned down embassies. Actually, I don't want to mention that concept because Turkish embassy has also been shut down for Yemen temporarily. However, it is not a real leave from Yemen. Abdullah Saleh's presidency has been withdrawn. However, there is another reality there. From his perspective, this is a transitional period, and there was such a request among the society. There is a popular request, and they try to meet that request somehow. And what is the solution? Can there be a solution? Considering Yemen, actually, the society is not lost their hopes totally. There is still hope among the society in Yemen, which means that there can be a solution and there will be final stages. And as you know, the 21st of September, on 21st of September, Sana'a was captured. However, there was an agreement between the representatives of the capturing countries, capturing regions. However, since there was an agreement, there was no reaction with the society. Since the Yemen citizens can be able to sign an agreement, so there is nothing to say as the international society. Therefore, they kept silent. They kept silence. And Turkey, including the other countries, has mentioned that we are supporting that agreement. Therefore, there was no international intervention. However, the constitutional explanation of that agreement is a little bit different. It was one-sided explanation. There were some there were some interviews and meetings, and after the negotiation process, there was the agreement, and the international society representatives has decided to leave Sana'a. However, United Nations are still in Yemen, and there are some aid activities, and there has to be some aid activities by the United Nations. Therefore, they are still active in there. However, they are not acting as a mediators, but the United Nations Secretary General has a special advisor for Yemen, and there are negotiations conducted under the control of the special secretary for a special advisor for Yemen. And we also mentioned about the former president's house arrest, and he fled from the house arrest and went to Aden, and therefore these bilateral negotiations has been stopped. And in order to make the negotiations and meetings alive once again, we need to take a step, and this is what the international society wants. And there was another question considering related to that issue. United Nations Council has a very clear decision about that, and that decision is very quickly enacted, and in that decision it clearly explains what the Houthis should be doing for the future. And Houthis actually has declared they will not recognize the decision by the United Nations Security Council, and they took further steps, and they had the Council of Revolution, and the Revolutionary Council has gathered and made different explanations related to that topic, and the President Hadi was referred to the public prosecutor's office as a guilty, and the public prosecution office has referred him accordingly. However, the current president, which is legally well known by the world, is considered as a guilty, depending on the decision by the public prosecution office in Yemen.
Hükümetin olması gibi iki başlılık ortaya çıktı. Yani şu andaki durum bizim Sana'dan ayrıldığımız geçen haftakine göre
when we look at the current situation in Sana, we actually left Sana last week, but the situation right now is more complex.
Diğer büyükelçilikler gibi kapatıp gelmedik. Büyükelçiliğimiz
Normally, the other countries' embassies are totally shut down. However, as Turkey, we didn't shut down our embassy there. We just temporarily locked the doors and come to Turkey. However, our relations with Yemen will continue, and we follow what is going on in there. One of our friends has asked what is the attitude of army. The army of Yemen unfortunately cannot give a single reaction to what is happening, and some part of the army are still affiliated to the former president. Therefore, they need to take the order from the former president. I want to make it clear from my point of view, or from the perspective of the other ambassadors. The president of Yemen is Abdurrahman el-Mansur Hadi. He is the official president of Yemen. However, once he went to Aden, he declared that I am under pressure, and he withdrew his resignment, which he gave under pressure. Therefore, the resignment is not enacted officially. It can only be official in the parliament. However, in parliament it didn't work. Therefore, the resignment letter was suspended. Therefore, since the resignment cannot be officially enacted, the Hadi is still the official president, technically the official president of Yemen. However, there are still dilemmas going on about who is the official president in Yemen. However, technically explaining, this Hadi is the official president and the former president. And former president is the Ali Abdullah Hadi. And the official president is the Abdurrahman Mansur Hadi. And we had a General Ali Muhsin. He is the Major General in the army, and he had the army. And once in September, the Houthis captured this Sana. There were some conflicts there. However, there was not a real war. Therefore, people may think that they are not strong enough to make a real war. Therefore, I cannot give you a clear attitude of the army. It changes, it depends on the conditions. And you asked if the Houthis are strong or not. There are different reasons to consider them as strong or not. For example, the Houthis and the Ali Abdullah Mansur, Ali Abdullah Sadi had a cooperation previously. However, that cooperation was a kind of problematic cooperation between the Houthis and Ali Abdullah Sadi's people. And there were 6 wars with Houthis, and these 6 wars happened during the presidency of Ali Abdullah Sadi. However, there is another important thing. The societies are complaining about some social problems, and they had a popular support. They had the support of the public as well, and that transition period was lasted long. And public started to think that the societal problems can be solved thanks to the Houthis presence, and they has to be acting wisely. Actually, they do not have any future plan to solve the problems. I mean, the real plans. There is no such a real plan. But people started to think that the Houthis can solve their problems, and they started to believe in them, because if they had a real structure or a real plan, they have a very correct point, very sensible and logical points what they mentioned so far about the Yemen situation. But since they do not have any real plan, I cannot give you any concrete example about them. And there's a subvention for the petroleum, for example, and it was sold cheaper than it is cost, and it is there's a subvention for the Yemen government from the petroleum prices as well, and it was returned to the government. Because once the government had the subsidies, the subvention of the petroleum, then it was illegally sent to the Djibouti or the other regions. However, some international bodies said that we will keep the subventions and still selling the petroleum cheaper. However, this is not reflecting the reality. Did Saudi Arabia support Houthi as ambassador? I cannot tell you everything that I know actually, but there is a fact that I don't think that Saudi Arabia openly supported the Houthis, and Abdullah Bey has explained its reasons, and I totally agree with him. And there had the decision, and will there anything about the decision, against the decision? Actually, no. The Security Council's decision was declared, and there was no reaction against the decision of the Security Council. There can be some conclusions about that, including the military intervention to Yemen. However, United Nations Security Council's decision, especially the 7th chapter, it says that there can be a military intervention to the Yemen. However, there is no step taken to implement that decision. On the contrary, there was a declaration saying that we do not recognize that decision, and there were explanations seeing that decision as a conspiracy policy. And a question was also about the dividing Yemen into three. What do you think about that? You asked me. It is actually a kind of speculative. There will be no gain if we divide Yemen into three parts. Of course, there will be the plan A or B, and which part of these three will be on our side. We don't know of this, and this will create another conflict within the country, and it is actually very difficult situation, very difficult topic, and the Yemen citizens, the public, is always afraid of having the country divided. However, once we divide the Yemen into two parts at least, for example, it won't stop. Again, it will be divided further on, and it will not solve the problems. And on the other hand, in and around the Marif, it is the heart of the Sunni Yemen, and there was an explanation about that part, and they declared that we are not affiliated to Sana government, and there will be another structure in that region which will negatively affect the overall governance of Yemen. And in that situation,
şu anda bir arada bulunan yapı bir kere bölünme başladığında nereye kadar
once this association has been started in a country, to what extent they will continue and when they will stop, actually God knows it. So
işlerine kimseyi karıştırmayacak yapıda.
And Yemen has different tribes, and their domestic affairs will not be solved with the foreign intervention. Therefore, the dividing the Yemen in different parts will not solve our problem. And you also asked the relation between Qatar and Yemen. Qatar actually is a kind of different country. They have a specific policy, for example, and Kuwait sometimes support them. However, they had a mediatory level in this respect, and they try to stand as possible as neutral. However, Qatar has a more moderate policy about that. And the recent policies has divided the Gulf countries into two groups, and the other Gulf countries withdrew their ambassadors from Qatar as a result of that development. However, Qatar is a little bit different from the other Gulf countries because they are more closer to the Islah Party. However, on the field, I cannot see the clear indicators of that. However, this is the general standpoint of Kuwait. And what is the latest situation of the USA operations? Actually, Al-Qaeda in Arabian Peninsula concept is located in Yemen, and USA consider Yemen as the heart of Al-Qaeda, and if there will be a war against Al-Qaeda, it will be very important for USA. and Abdurrabbu Mansur Hadi had close relations and cooperations with the USA during his post. It lasted almost 2.5 or 3 years, and that war was executed with the drones and the exchange of intelligence. However, after September, the real cooperations has not started yet. However, in January and February, it was clearly understood that the cooperation is getting harder and harder. Ansarullah movement is the name that the Houthis call themselves actually, and the Ansarullah movement has its own flag, and Houthis has a motto and a slogan, and the motto starts a declaration of that of USA, and it says that the victory is of Islam. And there are some certain symbols, and therefore I say that there are some dilemmas, and there is another factor feeding that dilemma. There was a message delivered to USA. We can have a war with Al-Qaeda, and they did this before. In the regions where the Al-Qaeda had the most effective actions, they fight against the Al-Qaeda in those regions. And we witnessed that. And in New York Times, we read some articles, and the Houthis call for that to Al-Qaeda. However, this is call for that to America, but this is just the motto. It was written in the newspapers in the USA. However, still there are operations by the USA. However, if there is no reflection on Sana'a of those operations, then it won't be a real success for the USA. Actually, within the USA, there are different structures, and those different structures has their own perspectives. There are CIA, Pentagon, or national security can be considered in this respect, and their perspective and decisions can be different from each other. Therefore, the real development within the USA is that there was a disassociation during the war against Al-Qaeda. And there is a paradox here, and USA realized that they cannot overcome that paradox, and they withdraw their embassy from Yemen as well. Thank you very much for all these explanations. I want to make a brief explanation about the about the relations between the Saudi Arabia and Yemen. Once the conflict started in September, they withdrew from the region actually, and they went to underground, and their leaders had left the country. They went to Qatar or to the European countries. However, what they say is that from this point of view, the Saudi Arabia wants both sides to have a conflict. They don't give direct support to Houthi. However, Saudi Arabia plays a role which makes these two sides have a struggle, and Saudi Arabia has a plan, and these two different parts solve themselves. Saudi Arabia taking them into a conflict, they stay away from them. And Yemen, when it comes to Yemeni Al-Qaeda,
şeyi var.
It is a deep-rooted Al-Qaeda, actually, starting from the very first moment of Al-Qaeda establishment.
Çünkü birçok kişi Yemen'den
They were in Yemen, and there were many tribes participated to the Afghanistan war in Yemen. And after their return, especially in the middle part of Yemen or in the eastern part of Yemen, their activities were started to be more dense.
Ele geçirmesinden sonra tabii ki bu gittikçe arttı.
And in time, Al-Qaeda had different declarations in order to make the public feel themselves more comfortable.
Husilerin toplu bulunduğu bölgelerden uzak dursunlar.
And the Al-Qaeda had declarations embracing the population there, and there were different discourses by Al-Qaeda, and people actually liked that.
Sana içerisindeki Sunni kesim tamamen sahipsiz hissediyor kendini.
And on the other hand, Al-Qaeda had a different type of situation for Yemen within the tribes, since they are living within the tribes.
Çok özel, çok dışarıdan, yani şu an IŞİD'de gördüğümüz gibi bir dışarıda bir örgüt değil.
It is not an foreign organization actually like ISIS. ISIS is an independent organization. It's a foreign organization. However, it is not like that for Yemen. Al-Qaeda is established within Yemen, and the current situation will make Yemen more strongful because the drone attacks targeted mainly to the civilians. And considering the Al-Qaeda's current situation, we can say that it was expected from Al-Qaeda to do more actually, especially for the capital, for Sana'a. However, the capacity of Al-Qaeda is lesser than expected right now. I also want to ask you a brief question.
Duyuyor musunuz? Sesle ilgili bir sıkıntı varmış. O düzelirken ben sorumu şey yapayım, ne derler, size ileteyim. Şimdi IŞİD kaos olan ortamlara girmesiyle
Once the struggle started in Libya, there were some chaos. However, there is no real existence of ISIL in Yemen. What is the reason of that? It is because of their
tercihini IŞİD'den yana değil, Bin Laden,
it is because of their choice actually. Yemen didn't prefer ISIS, but Al-Qaeda, and as I mentioned before,
aklı salimlik dediğimiz şey çok ciddi oranda Yemen'de güçlü.
Common sense is quite strong in Yemen, and the Yemen's population, Yemen's society is really different from the other regions' society when it comes to the common sense. And Afghanistan, Pakistan are the centers of Al-Qaeda. However, it has shifted towards Yemen recently. Their supporters or leaders shifted to Yemen. This is what has been said in that region. And there will be two things most probably in the future.
tekfirci
The
çok daha
Al-Qaeda's
aşırı
branch,
olanı
which was
Irak
which was
merkezi devam
turned
edecek.
into the ISIS,
Diğer
went to the
El-Kaide'nin diğer
Iraq,
kolu olan
and the
onlar
other
gibi
branch
tekfiri
of Al-Qaeda actually,
El-Kaide taraftarları ise artık
those
Yemen'de
are the
şey
supporters
olacak.
of Al-Qaeda, and they are located in Yemen right now.
Küçük bir evet.
Henüz bir varlık göstermediler. İnşallah göstermezler. Çünkü varlık göstermediler. Bir eylem yapmaları.
Yemen
And
El-Kaide'si
Yemeni
zaten onları
Al-Qaeda
reddediyorlar.
actually
Muhtemelen kendi
rejected
aralarında
them,
bile
and
çatışabilirler yani.
most probably there can be an internal conflict. Actually, there is not much to say left, but I also want to mention about a couple of points. What is the standpoint of Yemeni army, they ask. What is their attitude towards the development? The Yemeni army was state impartial previously. However, today they do not have any openly declarations about the situations, and they still try to stay impartial about the development. However, maybe they can take the Egyptian army as an example. If there is a conflict, then they can seek for their own advantages. I don't know for that yet. I'm not sure about that yet.
İdeoloji meselesi çok önemli. İşte hani İran Yemen'de ne yapıyor sorusunun asıl cevabı.
And what Iran is doing, what is Iran doing in Yemen? This question is quite important. And they are very successfully changing the ideology there. This is their main objective. In 2003, they started very intensely, and supported by Iran, they started to have some ideological tools to have an influence on Yemen. And in the last couple of years, there is a very effective process. For example, on every Friday, 20 Houthi young boy goes to Sana, and after Friday prayer, they are declaring their own declaration manifest, and they were taken under custody by the police. And this was a real ideological formation in the recent years, and I believe that it has a huge influence on the population as well. And what is the Qatar's influence right now? Its influence is parallel with the Ikhwan's influence in Yemen. If Ikhwan's is strongful, then their influence will be strongful as well. There will be a direct parallel situation between them. And USA is also have some ongoing operations in that region, and it gives the message to the Houthis that, okay, we can work with you. And another issue is that Saudi Arabia supported Houthi. Did the Saudi Arabia support Houthi? But I think there is a misunderstanding. There is no army, there is no aid by the Saudi Arabia supported to the Yemen, to the Houthis, for example.
Biraz daha zayıflamasını kendi çıkarına görüyor. Sonuna kadar Husilerle birlikte gideceğini söylemiyorum. Zaten yani Islah Partisi Suudi Arabistan
and the Islah Party is quite important for the Saudi Arabia. If they can manage to shape the Islah Party in their favor, for example, Saudi Arabia don't need to make any armed aid to the Houthis. Thank you very much for all our panelists and all our participants. This was actually an introduction for Yemen, and there will be more detailed panels in the future, I hope. Thank you very much for your coming here, and hope to see you